Is olive oil good for you? As we learn more and more about the effect of meats and high-fat diets on our overall health, you'd think that the conversation about which foods are considered healthy and which foods aren't would be getting simpler over the course of time. But as the world of nutritional science learns more and more, the conversation doesn't get simpler. In fact, as each new piece of research adds, there is more conflict and more discourse about which foods are technically considered healthful and which foods are considered not healthful and in what quantities. Now, before we wade into this conversation, a quick word from Mastering Diabetes. We have a system of green light, yellow light, and red light foods, which are designed to provide a simple guide for how to reverse insulin resistance and improve your health using your food as medicine. And while our team and thousands of people who have transformed their lives with this research can attest to the success of these guidelines, there are foods that sit somewhere in the gray area. For some of these foods, complex research points out that there may be risks associated with consuming them, but there also may be distinct health benefits that come along for the ride. And that makes sense and kind of doesn't make sense, and it just makes life a little bit more complicated than it has to be. Now, the way that food interacts with your biological machine is extremely complex. So as scientists learn more about various biochemical processes, our understanding of human health constantly evolves. This context is massively important. Now, when it comes to our guidelines, we tend to lean on the safer side. Until there's an overwhelming body of research advocating any particular food or food group, we simply can't recommend eating it. But there's a massive conversation going on about certain foods, especially because they can be so tasty and desirable, and they do show some promise as potential contributors to an overall health-promoting diet. Now, there's probably quite a few foods that jump into your head when I say these words, like organ meats, fish, high-fat plant-based foods like avocados, nuts, and coconuts. And don't forget semi-processed plant-based foods like Impossible Burgers and soy milk. Or how about collagen? How about coconut oil? How about MCT oil? And foods containing lectins. And the list goes on. Now, there's no shame in admitting that we, as a scientific community, don't have all the answers just yet, which is why today we're wading into the conflict-ridden discussion surrounding olive oil. Now, there are two big questions that come up when deciding if food is considered healthy or not. First, is the food itself healthier compared to other common alternatives? And second, are people who eat this food healthier than those who don't? We'll address both of those here. Number one, is it better to cook with high-quality olive oil compared to butter, mayonnaise, dairy fat, or other oils? That's the first question we can try and answer. Here, we believe that the answer is yes. Very much so. And when it comes to oils, at least as they are commonly used in food and cooking, we believe that high-quality olive oil is among one of the better possible options. It has a greater nutritional complexity than many other processed plant foods, and it doesn't contain compounds like heme iron and nitrites and sodium and leucine that you will commonly find in dairy products and butter. Number two, is it better to use oil-free cooking methods rather than high-quality olive oil? In other words, are people who don't consume oil healthier than those who do consume oil? We believe that the answer to this question is yes, though we acknowledge that specific conclusive studies on the topic have not yet been performed in depth to provide a definitive answer. Now, we believe that the answer is yes based off of three important factors. Number one, olive oil is a highly refined food. No matter how extra virgin, the research shows that whole foods contain more nutrient density and are better suited to the human digestive process than processed foods are. Those nutrients include 3 macronutrients, which are carbohydrate, fat, and protein, along with 6 micronutrients, which include vitamins, minerals, fiber, water, antioxidants, and phytochemicals. Okay, that gives you a total of 9 classes of nutrients together. Now, all whole foods contain all 9 classes of nutrients de facto. Every whole food that you can think of, whether it comes from the fruit world, the vegetable world, the whole grain world, or the starchy vegetable world, all of them contain carbohydrate, fat, protein, vitamins, minerals, fiber, water, antioxidants, and phytochemicals. Each food just contains a slightly different proportion of each one of those macronutrients and micronutrients, but all of them should be present in all whole foods. Oils, on the other hand, contain a limited quantity of many of those 9. And oils contain 0 carbohydrate and 0 protein because it is a pure fat. So in fat, yes, it does contain 100% fat, but it has 0 carbohydrate, zero protein, low vitamins, low minerals, zero fiber, zero water, and is low in antioxidants and low in phytochemicals. So if you were to compare the whole food, which is an olive, versus the refined product, which is olive oil, what you'll find is that the olive is a much more nutrient-dense food simply because it contains all of the macro and micronutrients, and the olive oil has been reduced in its nutrient density. So it stands to reason that when you process olive oil into an oil, you're going to lose much of the inherent nutrient density that was present in the original complex food. And that results in a liquid that contains a fraction of the original macronutrients and a fraction of the original micronutrients. So in other words, if you just make it real simple, it's smarter to eat the olive than it is to use the olive oil. Now, second, oil is the most calorie-dense food on the planet at 4,000 kilocalories per pound and can quickly increase your calorie balance, which we have observed can cause weight gain or an inability to lose weight in many people. We teach people to do a 30-day experiment to avoid using oil altogether. And many people report back to us that it's one of the most powerful weight loss tools that they've ever used before, and that the minute they started to eliminate oil from their diet, not just reduce, but eliminate it for a temporary period of time, that's when the weight loss experiment actually began. Now, third, we've observed that olive oil, or oil in general, is a high-fat food that contributes temporarily to insulin resistance, which causes significant elevations in blood glucose and significantly increased insulin requirements in the hours following its consumption, from between 3 hours and 18 hours. This makes it particularly risky for people living with any form of diabetes or for people who experience blood glucose dysregulation. It's from this position that we'll be addressing the discussion on olive oil, while acknowledging the alternative viewpoints and gaps that exist in the research. Now, in our coaching program, we proudly teach that we are not the food police. We support you in whatever choices are best for you. And we're here to help members of our community objectively understand the consequences of their decisions. So if you choose to have oil in your diet, that's a personal decision. Now, we're going to look at the latest research showing you what oil is best for your long-term health. We'll help you use an appropriate amount that's in alignment with your goals, whether it be reversing insulin resistance, losing weight, or significantly reducing your risk for many chronic diseases. We'll help you understand how oil is either helping or preventing you from achieving your ideal body weight. And we're going to help you understand how oil consumption is impacting your blood glucose and your cholesterol level and your blood pressure, both in the short term as well as the long term. And with that being said, we'd likely encourage you to experiment with an oil-free diet so that you can see if that makes a positive difference in regard to your overall health and your insulin sensitivity. Because trust me when I say, a short-term 30-day oil-free experiment usually ends up with the same conclusion. People begin losing weight or lose weight quicker than they ever have before, and they significantly improve their blood glucose control. They lower their fasting blood glucose, and most of these individuals rarely go back to putting olive oil or any other oil in their diet. But ultimately, the choice is yours. Now, we're going to work with you. We're not going to preach at you or tell you what to do. If you want more information specifically about how high-fat foods can increase your blood glucose values, then click on the link that you see on the screen to watch a video that has helped thousands of people understand the true impact that they can have on increasing their fasting and their post-meal blood glucose value. Now, if you're familiar with the Mastering Diabetes method, you'll know that all oils are listed in the red light category, meaning that we suggest that you minimize or preferably completely eliminate all oils from your diet in order to maximize your insulin sensitivity. Okay, you can click anywhere on the screen to review our traffic light guidelines, which will give you insight into the exact foods that we classify as green light, yellow light, and red light. However, let's understand that not all oils are created equal. First, let's address some types of oils that are generally accepted as quote-unquote unhealthy oils. There's two families of oils that are generally accepted as unhealthy, which include number one, oils that have a high concentration of omega-6 fatty acids, and number two, all hydrogenated oils. Oils with a high concentration of omega-6 fatty acids include soybean oil, corn oil, cottonseed oil, sunflower oil, peanut oil, sesame oil, and rice bran oil. The key problem with omega-6 fatty acids isn't the fact that they're unhealthy in and of themselves. In fact, omega-6 is a valuable fatty acid that plays a role in promoting inflammation in response to injury. So while omega-6 fatty acids are not harmful per se, it's the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids that is a very important aspect of your overall metabolic health. Now, the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is a marker of inflammation. The ideal 6-to-3 ratio is between 3-to-1 and 5-to-1. However, the more refined your diet is, and the higher your intake of omega-6 oils, that dramatically increases your 6-to-3 ratio north of 10-to-1, 20-to-1, and sometimes as high as 30-to-1 or even 50-to-1. A more specific ratio is actually what's called the AA to EPA ratio, which stands for the arachidonic acid to eicosapentaenoic acid ratio. Don't worry, this is not going to be on the test, okay? These are important fatty acids because these are two other compounds that are known as eicosanoids and prostaglandins, and those compounds can be made from arachidonic acid and eicosapentaenoic acid. Now, I know this is beginning to sound like biology class, and I don't want to bore you with all the annoying details. Eicosanoids and prostaglandins play diverse roles in your blood, especially in the inflammatory process, in fever promotion, in blood pressure regulation, and in blood clotting. Now, AA and EPA are very potent substances that have an ability to promote or decrease inflammation. In the same way that a lower omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is a marker of optimal health and generally considered a good strategy, the same goes true for the AA to EPA ratio. The lower that ratio, the better. Hydrogenated oils are the second type of oil that we should definitely avoid completely. Hydrogenation is a chemical process that was designed specifically to prolong the shelf life of liquid oils by turning them into solids at room temperature. By hydrogenating liquid oils, food manufacturers can prolong their shelf life and increase the amount of time they sit on a shelf, thereby increasing the probability that it will be sold and generate revenue. This hydrogenation process turns naturally occurring liquid fat into other solidified forms. And the process of doing that creates saturated fats as well as trans fats. And since the research is clear on the negative effects of trans fats, including but not limited to an increased risk of cardiovascular disease, an increased risk of atherosclerosis, increased LDL cholesterol, as well as saturated fat, which can increase your risk for many cardiovascular disturbances, we believe that it's better to avoid hydrogenated oils altogether. The less of those foods in your diet, the better. Get them out as soon as possible. Now, you'll notice that olive oil isn't on either of these no-go lists, which is true. And in fact, olive oil has been shown to have some very beneficial effects, which is why this topic can be incredibly confusing. Now, we're going to break down some of the most recent research here. This high-quality meta-analysis reports on the impact of olive oil and cancer risk. 48 studies were included in this analysis, which found that the highest quantity of olive oil intake was associated with a 31% lower likelihood of cancer, including breast cancer, gastrointestinal cancer, upper aerodigestive cancer, and urinary tract cancers. The key mechanism proposed here for its beneficial effect were the antioxidant properties of polyphenols, which naturally reduce oxidative stress and reduce the risk of developing cancer. Now, after all, olives themselves are packed with polyphenols, vitamins, and other vital nutrients that have been shown to improve your overall health. And some of these key compounds do remain present in the final oil when it becomes a liquid. However, what's missing from this data is the fact that there aren't many details for the overall quality of the diet. There were quite a few Mediterranean populations included in this analysis, but these benefits were displayed in non-Mediterranean populations as well, showing that the olive oil potentially does have some cancer prevention benefits on its own. Now, this is a compelling feather in the cap of olive oil. Now, perhaps even more compelling was a study of over 90,000 participants in the Nurses' Health Study and the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study in the United States, which investigated the impact of olive oil consumption on the risk of all-cause and cause-specific mortality. Over the course of 28 years, participants who reported the highest olive oil consumption, which is greater than 0.5 tablespoons per day or greater than 7 grams per day, had a 19% lower risk of all-cause mortality, which is a good thing, a 19% lower risk of cardiovascular disease mortality, which is a great thing, a 17% lower risk of cancer mortality, a 29% lower risk of neurodegenerative disease mortality, and an 18% lower risk of respiratory disease mortality. All of these are fantastic outcomes. And that was in comparison with those who rarely or never consumed olive oil. Now, this correlation even persisted after adjusting to other dietary factors, and data showed that as little as 1.5 grams a day of olive oil was associated with a benefit in reducing overall mortality. Now, what's important to note here is, once again, our key question: consuming olive oil instead of what? In this study, olive oil was used as a replacement for margarine, for butter and mayonnaise, and for dairy fat, and it was associated with the lowest mortality risk of all of those choices. What's interesting is that substituting olive oil for other vegetables, including canola oil, corn oil, safflower oil, and sunbean oil, did not result in reduced mortality risk, suggesting that vegetable oils in general may themselves confer reduced mortality. So one key takeaway from this study could be something that we probably already knew, that plant-derived oils may be healthier than saturated fatty acid-rich foods that come primarily from the animal-based world. And on a large scale, individuals who choose olive oil certainly did experience a reduced mortality rate, which shows that olive oil may in fact be a healthful choice and does have a place in a health-promoting diet. However, one key question that this leaves us with is olive oil gonna give you something that a plant-based whole food diet doesn't give? Now, the Mediterranean diet is one of the most popular subjects of study when it comes to exploring diets that integrate whole food, primarily plant-based nutrition, with the addition of small amounts of fish and oil and other foods that might traditionally be avoided in low-fat plant-based diets. And with good reason. Compared to the vast majority of global diets, the Mediterranean diet has been associated with improved cardiovascular health, with improved quality of life, with longevity, and with a reduced chronic disease risk and mortality risk. Now, add in the fact that the Mediterranean diet prominently features olive oil, and you have a compelling suggestion that olive oil can be part of a healthy overall diet. However, many researchers have begun to explore the various components of the Mediterranean diet to try and tease out which specific foods may be having specific effects. And it's hard to discern whether all of these featured staples that are present within the Mediterranean diet are healthy choices, or if some of them are technically covering up for some of the others. Or maybe the Mediterranean diet is simply just an overall healthy collection of foods that tend to be healthier than other collections of foods that may come from the standard American diet, as an example. Now, the research team in this article sought to understand the effect of meals rich in olive oil compared to an alternative, which is canola oil, and how they affected overall endothelial function in the post-meal state. And while the study was small in scale, the results were clear. The meal that was enriched in olive oil inhibited endothelial function far more than the meal that was rich in canola oil, with all other aspects of the diet being equal. Now, it's worth remembering here that we mentioned something above, which is that most foods are very complex. And for some foods, there can be a mixture of beneficial and negative effects at the same time. So it's entirely possible that olive oil both has the ability to reduce cancer and mortality risk, and the ability to hamper endothelial function simultaneously. In other words, it's doing some beneficial physiological effects, and it also has some negative physiological effects simultaneously. However, the near ubiquity of olive oil in the Mediterranean diet also supports another potential conclusion of this study, which is that it's entirely possible that the whole foods and plants present in the Mediterranean diet provide an overall healthful effect, and that one reduces their cancer risk, their mortality risk, and their risk for many chronic diseases despite the presence of olive oil rather than because of the presence of olive oil. Now, we believe that as more data comes out, specifically isolating the effects of olive oil as an isolated food, we will start to get a much cleaner picture of the effects of this one compound rather than having it be present inside of a large collection of foods that adds many confounding variables. Now, looking around at some of our contemporaries, this combination of hesitance and acceptance seems rather common. Many low-fat plant-based advocates use olive oil, acknowledging several caveats. Some people claim that some oils are certainly better than others and that olive oil is one of the more healthful choices in general. Others claim that eating whole food from which the olive oil was made is better than using the oil itself, and that is our position. Number 3, some people say that the research around olive oil is just flat out confusing, and it's often conflicting and leaves much room for further investigation, and you can't really draw any particular conclusions from it. Number 4, some people claim that olive oil or oils in general aren't ideal for people who are trying to improve their insulin sensitivity or lose weight or reverse any pre-existing chronic disease. And then number 5, some people claim that no matter what, oils are best consumed in small quantities and alongside a diet where the majority of calories come from, when you're consuming plant-based whole foods. Now, in general, this cautious acceptance seems to be the most common position in the world of olive oil in its current state, with an overall viewpoint that it is very important to focus on the overall quality of your diet and its benefits to your overall health, but using olive oil as one small puzzle piece in a much larger context of many other whole foods that make up the entire puzzle. So the original question was, is olive oil a healthy food choice? Well, as we've laid out, the answer is unfortunately kind of complicated. If you're going to consume olive oil, the question is instead of what? Olive oil clearly has some benefits, especially when compared with hydrogenated oils, with omega-6 rich oils, or with foods that contain high amounts of saturated fat that come predominantly from the animal-based world. But is it a better choice for your health than eating zero oil at all? Or would eliminating oil from your diet be a more healthful decision? For that question, the jury is still out. There are certainly extensive studies showing that olive oil is correlated with positive health outcomes, but these are attributed to the diet as a whole and not necessarily specifically to olive oil. We come from the position that if you are currently living with a pre-existing chronic disease, including obesity, cardiovascular disease, or diabetes, that you would be better off eliminating oil from your diet completely. And by doing so, you're going to significantly improve the function of your cardiovascular system. You'll significantly improve your insulin sensitivity, which will help you reverse the presence of insulin resistance, and you can significantly reduce your total calorie consumption, which is going to help you enter negative calorie balance and begin the weight loss process. Now, when we look at the Mediterranean diet, as we discussed earlier, it's solid proof that you can include olive oil in your diet and still reduce your risk of mortality while improving your overall health, and that's good news. But the Mediterranean diet is also rich in whole foods, and it draws the majority of its nutritive aspects from plant-based sources. So are you just quelling the negative effects of olive oil by eating mostly plant-based foods and eating small amounts of oil in general? Until we have more conclusive data that isolates the effect of olive oil independent of the other foods that are being consumed, we won't really know the answer to this question. And finally, within the context of people who are working to improve insulin sensitivity and reverse chronic diseases, is olive oil a healthy choice? Well, the answer to that is if you're trying to improve your insulin sensitivity, then we believe that it's better to reduce your total fat intake to 15% of your caloric intake, or as low as 10% of your total caloric intake, regardless of whether some high-fat foods might also have some protective benefits and a position. What that means is that if your total fat content is between 10 and 15% on average, and there happens to be a small amount of olive oil in there, it's not the end of the world, but removing it is going to significantly accelerate the improvement in your metabolic health, which will then help in reversing the metabolic damage that created your chronic disease in the first place. And this is especially true when you're in the critical early stages of reversing many chronic conditions and potentially dealing with high blood glucose levels, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol levels, because all of those can be significantly impacted by the presence of any type of oil. Let's say you do this and you reverse insulin resistance completely. Could olive oil be a food that you can incorporate on special occasions, or could it be beneficial in small amounts when managed correctly alongside a healthful collection of foods? The answer is most likely, potentially. Again, there's still not enough data to be able to conclusively come to that conclusion, because the scientists don't necessarily want to come to conclusions that aren't backed by an avalanche of science. But as more information and more data comes to light, we will be able to understand how olive oil can be incorporated into a diet, both in the insulin resistance reversal phase as well as afterwards. Now, with context in the Mastering Diabetes guidelines, we do know that olive oil is certainly not a green light food. Okay, it's incredibly calorie, it's dense, it's a pure fat, and that's not exactly what you want to be consuming when you're trying to actually improve your metabolic health. Now, could we make it a yellow light food? You know, it's just possible, and it's a food capable of being in your diet as long as it's very managed in small quantities. But we chose to put it in the red light category because the red light category is truly where it belongs, given that it is a highly refined food that can significantly increase your blood glucose, your blood pressure, and your cholesterol level simultaneously. Now, the Mastering Diabetes guidelines are excellent for your overall health, but they're specifically tailored to help you reverse the underlying cause of insulin resistance that causes the metabolic disturbances and the traffic jams that lead to insulin signaling defects. So we're going to keep it classified as a red light food. We're going to bolster our position to minimize or completely eliminate it. And especially if you're living with a chronic condition, then we recommend getting rid of it altogether. Now, more than anything else, we here at Mastering Diabetes understand that everybody is just a little bit different from the person next to them. I don't love making that statement, but it feels a little bit like a scapegoat for me. But the truth is that we are just enough different from one another that what one person may find beneficial for their health could be slightly different than the next person. Now, our guidelines are built off of understanding the latest research, over 800 scientific articles in our book, and it's custom tailored to help you reverse insulin resistance in a sustainable manner that's going to work in the short term and also stick with you in the long term. But for many people, there's a whole lifetime that awaits afterward, filled with potential exceptions and adaptations and pitfalls and temptations along the way. So that's why we have a team of coaches that are here to help you along the way in this process, because studies and science provide great insight and guidance into how to move forward. But when it comes to the specifics of how to actually implement this lifestyle into your diet and into your life, it can be pretty challenging. So if you're interested in reversing insulin resistance and learning how to integrate a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet and how to use that to transform your life, then there's a number of different ways that we can help. We have personalized group coaching, and we also have personalized one-on-one coaching. And if you're looking to take control of your diabetes health today with the guidance of your own personal diabetes expert in your pocket at all times, that's what we're here for. Along the way, we know you're going to improve your overall health in a significantly powerful way, and we're here to help be that guide to show you exactly what to eat, how to eat, and when to eat so that you can control your health with precision. We hope you enjoyed this video, and we will see you next time.